Have you ever wondered what happens when two men, trained to kill each other without mercy, meet face to face in the mud and realize they're more alike than different? What would you do if destiny placed you inches away from your sworn enemy, and in that frozen moment, you discovered that war had lied to both of you? Before we dive into this story that will challenge everything you believe about loyalty, duty, and humanity, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. And if you believe these hidden stories deserve to be told, subscribe to the channel. We need your help to keep bringing these secret accounts to light. The truth has been buried for too long. December 1944. The Ardennes forest stretched like a frozen tomb across the Belgian-German border, its ancient trees holding secrets that would never be spoken aloud. The Battle of the Bulge had transformed this peaceful woodland into hell on earth, where American and German forces collided in one of the bloodiest confrontations of World War II. But within this chaos, a story emerged that military historians would later try to erase from official records. Staff Sergeant James Redfeather Martinez carried two names into battle. His official military designation appeared on every document, every order, every piece of correspondence from the War Department. But among the men of the 2nd Battalion, 110th Infantry Regiment, he was known simply as Apache. The nickname stuck not because of his Mescalero Apache heritage from his mother's side, though that played a part. It stuck because of what he could do in the dark, in the silence, in those terrible spaces between heartbeats where death lived. Apache had been in Europe since June 6, 1944. He'd waded through the blood-red waters of Omaha Beach, seen men torn apart by machine gun fire before they could even reach the sand. He'd fought through the hedgerows of Normandy, where every field was a killing ground and every stone wall hid a sniper. He'd marched through liberated French villages, where children threw flowers at soldiers who couldn't smile anymore, their eyes already dead from things they'd witnessed. By the time the Ardennes offensive began, Apache had killed 47 German soldiers. He kept no tally, no marks carved into his rifle stock like some men did. The number existed in his mind as clearly as his own name, each death a weight that settled somewhere behind his ribs. 47 men who had mothers, perhaps wives, maybe children waiting for them in cities he'd never see. 47 times he'd pulled a trigger, or thrust a bayonet, or thrown a grenade. And 47 times the world had become a little emptier. His squad had been separated from the main battalion during a German artillery barrage on the morning of December 16th. The sound of 88mm shells screaming through winter air created a symphony of terror that no music could ever replicate. Trees exploded into splinters. Snow turned black with powder and red with blood. Men screamed for medics, for mothers, for God, for death to come quickly. Apache and 3 others had taken cover in a collapsed farmhouse, waiting for the barrage to end, waiting to learn if they were the last members of their unit still breathing. When silence finally returned to the forest, it brought something worse than the shelling: uncertainty. The Germans had broken through American lines in a massive offensive, using fog and surprise to shatter defenses that commanders had thought impenetrable. Entire units had been overrun, captured, or annihilated. Communications were cut. Orders were contradictory or non-existent. The front line had become a fluid, terrifying thing where friend and foe could occupy the same stretch of woods without knowing it until bullets started flying. Apache made the decision that his training demanded. They would move southeast toward what he hoped was still friendly territory, using the dense forest as cover. Private Eddie Kowalski from Chicago, Private First Class Marcus Webb from Georgia, and Corporal Dennis O'Reilly from Boston followed without question. Apache had kept them alive this long. They trusted him to continue doing so, even when trust seemed like a foolish luxury in this frozen hell. They moved through the Ardennes like ghosts, Apache leading with the silence his grandfather had taught him during childhood summers in New Mexico. He read the forest the way other men read newspapers, interpreting every broken twig, every disturbed patch of snow, every sound that didn't belong. Behind him, the others did their best to match his quiet, though no white soldier could ever move through woods the way Apache did. It was in his blood, his bones, his breath. On the second day after the separation, they found the first body. A German soldier, no more than 19 years old, frozen solid in a sitting position against a tree. His helmet was gone. His rifle lay across his lap. His eyes, still open, stared at something only the dead could see. Blood had frozen in a dark stain across his chest, where shrapnel had punched through his uniform. Around his neck hung a small silver cross, the kind a mother might give her son before he left for war. "Poor bastard," Webb muttered, making the sign of the cross despite being Baptist. Death had a way of making all religions blend together. All prayers sound the same. They moved on. An hour later, they found 3 more German corpses. These ones burned beyond recognition inside a destroyed half-track. The smell of cooked meat made O'Reilly vomit into the snow, though he'd seen worse things in Normandy. Some horrors never became easier to stomach. By dusk on December 18th, they'd been moving for nearly 50 hours with minimal rest and no hot food. Their rations were running low. The cold had become a living enemy, creeping into bones and stealing strength with invisible fingers. Kowalski had frostbite on 3 toes, though he hadn't told anyone yet. Apache knew anyway. He could see it in how the man walked, in the way he favored his left foot. They took shelter in a small hunting lodge, abandoned years ago based on the thick dust and empty shelves. The roof was intact, which meant they could risk a small fire using what little wood they could find inside. The warmth felt like a miracle, though Apache knew miracles were dangerous things in war. Miracles made you careless. Carelessness made you dead. "We lost, Sarge?" Kowalski asked, speaking the question they'd all been thinking. His boyish face, still carrying traces of baby fat, despite months of combat, looked ancient in the firelight. "We're not lost," Apache replied, studying the military map he'd been carrying since Normandy. The paper was creased and stained with mud, sweat, and things he didn't want to think about. "We're exactly where we need to be. Right here, right now, still breathing." "That's not what I meant," Kowalski said softly. "I meant the whole thing. The battle, the war. Are we losing?" Apache looked at each of his men in turn. These boys, and they were boys, regardless of the killing they'd done, deserved an honest answer. "Don't know," he admitted. "But I know this. Long as we're alive, we keep fighting. Long as we keep fighting, we haven't lost. That's all the truth I got for you." They took turns on watch that night, 2 hours each, while the others slept the shallow, restless sleep of men who'd forgotten what real rest felt like. Apache took the last watch, from 0400 to dawn, because he always took the last watch. Something about greeting the sun felt important. A connection to his grandfather, to his ancestors, to something larger than this war and its endless appetite for young men's lives. The German soldier appeared at dawn. Apache saw him through the frosted window of the hunting lodge, a lone figure moving through the trees with the careful steps of someone who knew hunters were near. For a moment, just a moment, Apache watched without reaching for his weapon. The soldier was perhaps 25, with hair so blond it was almost white, cut in the severe military style of the Wehrmacht. His uniform was cleaner than it should have been, suggesting he was either recently arrived at the front or remarkably disciplined about maintaining appearances even in chaos. He carried an MP-40 submachine gun, held across his chest in a ready position. His breath created small clouds in the freezing air. His eyes scanned the forest with the practiced intensity of a man who'd seen combat, who knew that death could arrive from any direction without warning. Apache's hand moved to his M1 Garand rifle with practiced smoothness, bringing the weapon up slowly, quietly, until the German soldier filled his iron sights. At this distance, maybe 70 yards, he couldn't miss. One shot, 48 deaths instead of 47. One more weight to carry. His finger found the trigger, taking up the slack in that final moment before firing. The German soldier stopped walking, his head turning slightly as if he'd heard something. Apache's heart hammered against his ribs. The forest held its breath. Then the German soldier's left hand moved, and Apache saw it. A small wooden toy, carved in the shape of a horse, clutched between cold fingers. The soldier brought it to his lips and kissed it gently before slipping it back into his coat pocket. The gesture was so tender, so human, so completely divorced from war and killing that Apache's finger froze on the trigger. The German soldier continued walking, passing the hunting lodge without noticing it, disappearing into the trees like a ghost. Apache lowered his rifle slowly, his hands shaking in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. Behind him, he heard movement as his men began to wake, but he didn't turn around. He kept staring at the spot where the German soldier had vanished, kept seeing that wooden horse, kept wondering who had carved it, and who was waiting for this blonde-haired boy to come home. "Contact?" O'Reilly asked groggily, reaching for his weapon. "No," Apache said quietly. "Nothing. Just a deer." They moved out an hour later, heading southeast again, following the compass and Apache's instincts. The encounter with the German soldier troubled Apache in ways he couldn't articulate, not even to himself. He'd killed 47 men without hesitation, because hesitation meant death. But something about that wooden horse, that gentle kiss, had cracked something inside him that he wasn't sure could be repaired. The Ardennes forest seemed to close in around them as they moved, the trees growing thicker, the paths narrower, the silence more oppressive. Snow began falling again, large flakes that covered their tracks, but also reduced visibility to almost nothing. Apache called frequent halts, listening to the forest, trying to read the stillness for signs of danger. Around noon, they heard gunfire in the distance. Not the steady, organized sound of a battle, but scattered shots, irregular and desperate. Someone was fighting for their life, and they were losing. The moral calculus of war said they should investigate, should help fellow soldiers if possible. The survival calculus said they should avoid all contact, preserve their own lives, complete their mission of reaching friendly lines. Apache chose morality. Or perhaps he chose something else. A need to prove that the man who'd let the German soldier live wasn't a coward, wasn't weak, wasn't losing his edge. They moved toward the gunfire at double time, weapons ready, spacing themselves properly in case of ambush. They found another American squad, or what was left of one. 5 men pinned down by German machine gun fire, trapped in a small clearing with no cover except the corpses of their fallen comrades. The machine gun, an MG-42, Apache's trained mind identified automatically, sat in a strong defensive position on a small rise, protected by logs and snow, operated by soldiers who knew their craft. "We gotta help them," Webb said, his Georgia drawl thick with urgency. They're dead if we don't. Apache studied the situation with the cold calculation that had kept him alive through 6 months of combat. The machine gun position was strong, but not perfect. If they could flank it from the right, come up through a small ravine he could see about 50 yards away, they might get close enough to use grenades. Might. The word carried all the weight of might not, might die trying, might make everything worse. Kowalski, Webb, with me, Apache ordered. O'Reilly, you provide covering fire. Short bursts, make them think we're a bigger force than we are. On my signal. They moved into position, using every scrap of cover the forest provided. Apache led, with Kowalski and Webb following in his footsteps, literally placing their boots in the prints he left in the snow. The ravine was shallow, but deep enough to hide their approach, though it meant crawling through icy water that soaked through their uniforms and stole precious body heat. The machine gun continued its stuttering song of death, and Apache could hear screaming from the trapped Americans. Someone was hit, dying slowly, calling for a medic who couldn't reach him. The sound crawled inside Apache's head and made a nest there, joining all the other screams he carried from Normandy, from France, from every battlefield since he'd stepped off that landing craft into hell. They got within 30 yards of the German position before being spotted. A young German soldier, maybe 18, turned from the machine gun and saw them emerging from the ravine. His eyes went wide with surprise and fear. He opened his mouth to shout a warning. Apache shot him in the chest. The boy fell backward, his warning dying as a wet gurgle. 48. The rest happened fast, the way combat always did when planning met chaos. Kowalski threw a grenade that landed perfectly in the machine gun nest. The explosion turned the winter morning into thunder and screaming. Webb charged forward, his Thompson submachine gun chattering. Apache followed, his Garand barking steady and sure, each shot finding its target. 3 more Germans died in the position, 49, 50, 51. The numbers accumulated like debt, like sin, like the price of staying alive in a world determined to kill everyone. When the shooting stopped, silence returned to the Ardennes, broken only by moaning from the wounded. Apache approached the German machine gun nest carefully, weapon ready in case someone was playing dead. Instead, he found only corpses and something else. A photograph blown free from one dead German's pocket by the grenade blast. A family portrait, professionally taken, showing a mother, father, and 3 children standing in front of a modest house. The blond German soldier, the one Apache had seen that morning, stood on the left side of the photo, younger, smiling, his arm around a little girl who must have been his sister. Apache picked up the photograph with trembling hands. The coincidence felt impossible, yet here it was, proof that the man he'd spared was connected to the men he'd just killed. Were they in the same unit? Had they been searching for each other? Would the blond soldier find these corpses and recognize his friends, his maybe brothers? Sarge? Webb's voice pulled Apache back to the present. You okay? Fine, Apache lied, pocketing the photograph for reasons he couldn't explain. Check on those Americans. Get a count of who's alive and who needs a medic. Of the 5 trapped soldiers, 3 were dead and 2 were wounded but mobile. They were from the 28th Infantry Division, separated from their unit during the German offensive, trying to reach Bastogne, where American forces were supposedly holding out. Their sergeant had been killed an hour ago, leaving a scared private first class in charge of men who'd already lost faith in their chances of survival. Apache took command without discussion. That's what sergeants did. That's what Apache did. He redistributed ammunition, assessed their supplies, studied his map, and made a decision. They would continue southeast, aiming for Bastogne, hoping the town hadn't already fallen. They were now 9 men instead of 4, which meant 9 mouths to feed with dwindling rations, and 9 bodies to keep warm with insufficient supplies. But it also meant 9 rifles instead of 4. 9 chances instead of 4. 9 reasons to keep fighting instead of 4. They moved out within the hour, leaving the German corpses unburied in the snow. There was no time for proper burials, no time for dignity or respect, or the rituals that separated men from animals. The forest would claim these bodies, would freeze them solid until spring, when some other soldiers or perhaps Belgian civilians would find them and wonder who they'd been before war stripped away their names and stories. As they walked, Apache couldn't stop thinking about the photograph in his pocket, couldn't stop seeing that wooden horse, couldn't stop wondering if the blond German soldier was thinking about his family, the same way Apache was thinking about his own mother in New Mexico, his father buried in a veteran's cemetery, his younger sister who wrote letters he couldn't bring himself to answer because what could he possibly say about what he'd become? The snow fell harder as afternoon approached, turning the world into a white blur where direction became guesswork and hope became prayer. Apache led them through it anyway, following the compass and instinct and the desperate belief that southeast meant survival. Southeast meant friendly lines. Southeast meant an end to this frozen nightmare. Night came early in the Ardennes winter, turning the forest into absolute darkness by 1600 hours. They were forced to stop, to huddle together for warmth, to share body heat and fear, and the growing suspicion that they might not make it after all. Webb's frostbite had spread to his hands. Kowalski's cough had become wet and ragged. O'Reilly hadn't spoken in hours, his eyes vacant with thousand-yard stare. Apache made them eat half rations and melt snow for water. He checked weapons, cleaned them as best he could with frozen fingers, redistributed ammunition so everyone had enough for at least one firefight. He did the things a sergeant does, the things that keep men alive when staying alive seems impossible. Around midnight, the blond German soldier returned. Apache was on watch when he saw the figure moving through the darkness, illuminated by moonlight reflecting off fresh snow. The same blonde hair, the same careful movements, the same Wehrmacht uniform. For a moment, Apache thought he was hallucinating. That exhaustion and cold had finally broken his mind the way it had broken so many others. But no, the German soldier was real, and he was heading directly toward their position. Apache could have shot him, should have shot him. His rifle was already in his hands, his finger already on the trigger. At this distance, maybe 40 yards, even in darkness, he wouldn't miss. 52 deaths instead of 51. One more ghost to join the others. Instead, Apache did something that would have gotten him court-martialed if anyone had witnessed it. He stood up, stepped out from behind his cover, and raised his hand in a gesture that transcended language, transcended war, transcended everything except the basic human need to understand why fate kept throwing 2 men together. The German soldier froze. His MP-40 came up, pointing directly at Apache's chest. For 3 heartbeats, maybe 4, they stood like that. 2 men separated by 40 yards and an ocean of blood, each holding the other's life in their hands. Then, the German soldier lowered his weapon. Slowly, carefully, he raised both hands above his head, the submachine gun dangling from its strap. He took 1 step forward, then another, moving with exaggerated slowness, giving Apache every opportunity to change his mind and shoot him dead. Apache glanced back at his sleeping men, then made a decision that defied every regulation, every order, every bit of common sense he'd accumulated through 6 months of combat. He walked toward the German soldier, his rifle held across his chest in a position that was neither threatening nor surrendering, meeting his enemy halfway in the snow-covered forest. They stopped 10 feet apart, two soldiers studying each other with the intensity of men who knew this moment was balanced on a knife's edge. Up close, Apache could see that the German soldier was older than he'd initially thought, maybe 30. His face carried the same exhaustion, the same haunted look that Apache saw in mirrors when mirrors were available. Lines around his eyes spoke of sleepless nights and horrors witnessed. A small scar on his left cheek suggested a close call with death. "Amerikaner," the German said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. Not a question, but an acknowledgement. "Deutsch," Apache replied, using the only German word he knew. The German soldier smiled, a sad, tired expression that held no humor. From his coat pocket, he pulled out the wooden horse, holding it up so Apache could see it clearly in the moonlight. "Mein Sohn," he said, then paused, searching for English words. "My son, Hans. 5 years. I make for him before leaving." Apache felt something crack wider inside his chest, that same fissure that had opened when he'd first seen the toy that morning. He reached into his own pocket and pulled out the photograph, holding it out. "Your friends," he said simply. "I'm sorry." The German soldier took the photograph with trembling hands, his eyes widening as he recognized the faces. His breath caught, and for a moment Apache thought he might cry. Instead, the soldier stared at the image for a long time before speaking. "Werner, Klaus, Friedrich," he said, pointing to each corpse in turn. "Brothers, not blood, but brothers. We fight together since Poland." "I'm sorry," Apache repeated, because what else could he say? How could he explain that he'd killed these men to save other men? That war demanded mathematics, where human lives were simply numbers in impossible equations? The German soldier pocketed the photograph carefully, as if it were made of glass. When he looked up again, his eyes held something Apache recognized because he felt it too. Exhaustion. Bone-deep weariness that went beyond physical fatigue, that touched something fundamental in the soul. The look of men who'd seen too much death, dealt too much death, lost too much of themselves in the machinery of war. "You see me, this morning," the German said, his English broken but understandable. "You no shoot. Why?" Apache thought about lying, about making up some tactical reason or strategic consideration. Instead, he told the truth. "The horse, the way you kissed it, reminded me that you're human, not just an enemy. Human." The German soldier nodded slowly, as if Apache had confirmed something he'd suspected. "War makes us animals," he said, "but we are not animals. We are men, fathers, sons, brothers. We forget this. War wants us to forget this." They stood in silence for a moment, two men having a conversation that would be considered treason by both their armies, that violated every principle of military discipline, that made no sense in the cold logic of combat. Yet, it was perhaps the most important conversation either of them had ever had. "Your men," the German soldier said, gesturing toward where Apache's squad slept. "They need medicine, food. I have extra. From my unit's supply cache, I bring for you." He unslung his pack and opened it, pulling out tins of meat, packages of hardtack, a small medical kit containing sulfa powder, bandages, and precious morphine syrettes. He laid them in the snow between them like offerings at an altar. Apache stared at the supplies, his mind struggling to process what was happening. This was insane. This violated every rule of warfare. This could be a trap, a trick, a way to lure him into complacency before the killing started again. But when he looked into the German soldier's eyes, he saw only sincerity, only another man trying to hold on to his humanity in circumstances designed to strip it away. "Why?" Apache asked. "Why help us?" The German soldier was quiet for a long moment, his breath creating clouds in the freezing air. When he finally spoke, his words came slowly, carefully chosen. "Because you show mercy this morning. Because if I do not help, I forget I am human too. Because maybe, if I do good thing now, God forgives bad things I do before." He knelt in the snow and began arranging the supplies more neatly. "My name is Stefan," he said. "Stefan Hoffmann, from Hamburg. I am teacher before war. Mathematics. Now I teach only killing." Apache knelt across from him, helping to organize the supplies even though his training screamed that this was wrong, dangerous, suicidal. "James Martinez," he said. "Everyone calls me Apache, New Mexico. I was going to be a mechanic. Fix cars, not kill people." Stefan smiled that same sad smile. "Mechanic. Good job. Honest job. Better than this." He gestured around at the forest, at the war, at everything they'd become. They talked for 20 minutes, maybe 30. Two enemies sharing confidences in broken English and hand gestures. Stefan told Apache about his son Hans, about his wife Marie, who worked in a munitions factory in Hamburg, about the mathematics class he'd taught at a gymnasium before being conscripted. Apache told Stefan about his mother who ran a small restaurant in Alamogordo, about his Apache grandfather who'd taught him to track and hunt, about his dreams of opening his own garage after the war ended, if he survived long enough to see it end. It was madness, complete madness. Yet in that madness, both men found something they'd thought war had killed forever: connection, understanding. The recognition that the man across from them was exactly that. A man, not a monster, not a target, not an enemy to be destroyed, but a human being caught in the same nightmare. "I must go," Stefan finally said, glancing at the sky where dawn would arrive in a few hours. "My unit will search for me. If they find me here—" He didn't finish the sentence. They both knew what would happen. Execution for treason, probably. Or worse. Apache nodded, understanding flooding through him. "Be safe," he said, words that felt ridiculous given the circumstances, but were the only words he had. Stefan stood, shouldering his empty pack. He looked at Apache one final time, and something passed between them that needed no translation. A promise, perhaps. A prayer. An acknowledgement that in a world gone mad, they'd found a moment of sanity, however brief. "We meet again. Maybe we must kill each other," Stefan said quietly. "Orders are orders. War is war. But tonight, I see James, not enemy. I hope you'll remember, Stefan, not just German soldier." "I'll remember," Apache promised, and he meant it with every fragment of his shattered soul. Stefan turned and walked back into the darkness, disappearing among the trees like a ghost. Apache watched him go, then looked down at the supplies in the snow. Real, tangible. Proof that the last half hour hadn't been a dream or hallucination. He gathered the supplies quietly and returned to where his men slept, his mind churning with implications he wasn't ready to confront. What he'd done, fraternizing with the enemy, accepting supplies from a German soldier, letting an enemy combatant walk away not once but twice, could get him executed. Would get him executed if anyone ever found out. But as he looked at his sleeping men, especially Webb, whose frostbite would benefit from the medical supplies, Apache knew he'd made the right choice. Maybe not the military choice, maybe not the strategic choice, but the human choice. The choice that acknowledged there were some things more important than victory, more important than duty, more important than following orders. When dawn came, Apache told his men he'd found German supplies in an abandoned cache. They accepted the explanation without question, too grateful for the food and medicine to wonder about inconsistencies in his story. Webb's frostbite received treatment. Kowalski's cough improved with better nutrition. O'Reilly came back from whatever dark place he'd retreated to, his eyes showing signs of life again. They reached American lines 3 days later, linking up with elements of the 101st Airborne Division defending Bastogne. The town was surrounded by German forces, under siege, but holding, barely. Apache and his men were absorbed into the defense, issued fresh ammunition and hot food, and orders to hold the perimeter at all costs. The Battle of Bastogne became one of the most famous stands in American military history. For weeks, American forces held out against overwhelming German numbers, waiting for relief, fighting through snow and cold and constant bombardment. Apache fought with the same efficiency, the same deadly skill that had kept him alive since Normandy. He killed German soldiers when they attacked, killed them without hesitation, because that's what war demanded. But every time he pulled the trigger, every time another body fell, he wondered if the man dying might be Stefan Hoffmann, mathematics teacher from Hamburg, father of 5-year-old Hans. He wondered if Stefan was out there in the German lines, wondering the same thing about him. He wondered if the mercy they'd shown each other had been a gift or a curse, if it would have been kinder to kill each other quickly rather than carry this weight of knowing the human behind the uniform. On December 26th, relief finally arrived. General Patton's Third Army broke through the German lines, and the siege of Bastogne ended. The German offensive ground to a halt, then collapsed as American forces counterattacked. The Battle of the Bulge was over. The Allies had held. Apache survived. So did Kowalski, Webb, and O'Reilly. They were among the lucky ones. Thousands of Americans and Germans died in the Ardennes forest, their bodies frozen in the snow, their stories lost to history. After the battle, Apache tried to find information about German units that had fought around Bastogne, tried to learn if Stefan had survived. He asked questions carefully, never revealing why he wanted to know, searching for any mention of a Stefan Hoffmann from Hamburg. He found nothing. The chaos of war had swallowed that information, along with everything else. The war in Europe ended in May 1945. Apache survived to see it, survived all the way to Berlin, accumulated a final count that he never spoke aloud to anyone. He received medals for valor, commendations for leadership, recognition for keeping his men alive through impossible circumstances. He accepted them with the same hollowness that lived in his chest, that had opened when he saw Stefan kiss that wooden horse. He returned to New Mexico in August 1945, after the Japanese surrender. His mother barely recognized him. The boy who'd left for war had become someone else, someone hard and distant and haunted. He opened his mechanic shop like he'd planned, fixed cars, lived a quiet life that looked normal from the outside. But he never forgot Stefan Hoffmann. Never forgot that night in the Ardennes when two enemies became two men, if only for a brief moment. He kept the photograph he'd taken from the German machine gun nest, stored in a box with his medals and dog tags, and all the other artifacts from a war he tried hard to forget. In 1963, 18 years after the war ended, Apache received a letter. It came from Hamburg, Germany, forwarded through military channels after being sent to his old unit. The letter was written in careful English, every word precisely chosen. Dear James Martinez, I hope this letter finds you well and alive. I am Stefan Hoffman. Perhaps you remember me from the Ardennes forest, December 1944. I have searched many years to find you. I wish to tell you that I survived the war. I returned to Hamburg. My son Hans is now a man of 23 years, studying mathematics like his father. My wife Marie lives still. We speak often of that night when enemy became friend. I think you saved my life with your mercy, and I try to honor this gift by being good man, good father, good teacher again. I pray you are well. I pray you found peace after war. I pray God watches over you as He watched over us that night in snow. Your friend always, Stefan Hoffman. Apache read the letter 17 times that first day. He cried, reading it, the first tears he'd shed since before the war. He wrote back immediately, and thus began a correspondence that continued for decades. They never met in person. The logistics were difficult, and perhaps both men feared that meeting again might shatter the memory of that perfect moment of humanity in the midst of hell. But they wrote letters, long letters about their lives, their families, their struggles to reconcile who they'd become during the war with who they were trying to be after it. They sent photographs. Stefan sent pictures of Hans graduating university, getting married, having children of his own. Apache sent pictures of his shop, his mother, the life he'd built in the desert that was so different from the frozen forests of Europe. In 1987, Stefan Hoffman died of a heart attack at age 73. His son Hans wrote to Apache, informing him of his father's death and including a small package. Inside was the wooden horse, the one Stefan had carved for his son before going to war. The one Apache had seen him kiss twice in the Ardennes forest, 43 years earlier. A note accompanied it, in Stefan's handwriting, clearly written years before his death. Dear James, if you receive this, I am gone. I want you to have this horse. It represents what we saved in each other that night in snow. Our humanity, our souls, our ability to see man instead of enemy. Keep it, and remember, not all of war is death. Sometimes, even in darkest place, there is mercy. There is grace. There is God. Your eternal friend, Stefan. Apache kept the wooden horse on his workbench for the rest of his life, a reminder that even in hell, humanity can survive if men choose to protect it. He died in 1995 at age 75, his secrets intact, his story known only to those who'd read his letters to Stefan. Letters his daughter found after his death and donated to a military museum. But here's what troubles historians, what keeps researchers digging through archives even today. In 2003, a German researcher found records suggesting that Stefan Hoffman's unit received orders on December 20, 1944, to execute any American prisoners taken during the Ardennes offensive. Orders that came from the highest levels, orders meant to terrorize the enemy, orders that Stefan would have been obligated to follow. Yet Stefan gave supplies to Apache instead. Stefan chose mercy over orders. Stefan risked execution to save the men who'd killed his friends. Why? Was it simply the mercy Apache had shown him that morning? Or was there something deeper at work? Some force beyond human understanding that brought two men together in that frozen forest to remind the world that even in war's darkest moments, the divine spark in humanity cannot be fully extinguished? Apache's daughter, interviewed for a documentary in 2007, shared something her father had told her shortly before his death. He said that night in the Ardennes, when he met Stefan, he felt the presence of something sacred. Not religious exactly, but holy. He said it was like God reached down into that hell and reminded two men that they were more than just killers. They were his children, and he hadn't forgotten them, even when the world had. The wooden horse sits today in the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, accompanied by Apache's medals, Stephen's letters, and the photograph of 3 dead German soldiers that connected 2 men across an ocean of violence. Visitors see it as a curiosity, a touching story of enemies becoming friends, a feel-good tale about humanity triumphing over hate. But those who look closer, who read all the letters, who study the timeline and the records, begin to notice inconsistencies. Questions that have no easy answers, like why Stephen was alone that night, separated from his unit, unless he'd deserted his post specifically to find the American soldier who'd spared his life. Like how he knew exactly where Apache and his men were camping, unless he'd been following them since that morning. Like why he had medical supplies and extra rations in his pack, when his own unit was reportedly suffering from severe shortages. Most troubling of all, German military records show no Stephen Hoffmann serving in the Ardennes during the Battle of the Bulge. No mathematics teacher from Hamburg. No father of a son named Hans. The unit identification on the letters Stephen sent after the war matches no actual Wehrmacht division. His service number, when checked against archives, doesn't exist. Yet the letters are real. The photographs are real. The wooden horse is real. Apache's daughter remembers meeting Hans Hoffmann when he visited New Mexico in 1991, remembers him being exactly who and what he claimed to be. German records confirm a Stephen Hoffmann, mathematics teacher, living in Hamburg from 1946 until his death in 1987. His tax records, his employment records, his existence after the war is thoroughly documented. It's only his existence during the war that has no proof. No records, no evidence he was ever a soldier at all. So who was the man in the Ardennes forest that December night? Who gave Apache those supplies? Who exchanged humanity with him in the snow? Was it Stephen Hoffmann, whose records were somehow lost or destroyed in the chaos of Germany's collapse? Or was it something else, something that took the form of a German soldier to deliver a message about mercy, about grace, about the persistence of good even in absolute evil? Apache went to his grave insisting Stephen was real, was human, was exactly who he claimed to be. But he also told his daughter something strange in his final days, when morphine made him talkative about things he'd kept hidden for 50 years. He said that in all his years of combat, in all the death he witnessed and dealt, he never once felt the presence of the divine except for 2 moments. The first was in that forest, meeting Stephen. The second was when he died. "I saw him there," Apache said, his final words recorded by his daughter. Stephen was there, waiting, and he wasn't alone. There were others. All the men from both sides, the ones who remembered they were human, even in the middle of hell. They were waiting for me, and they were smiling. And behind them, beyond them, there was a light. And in that light, I saw him. I saw Jesus. And he was smiling too, like he was saying, "Welcome home, son. You did good. You stayed human. You chose mercy when the world wanted murder. Welcome home." The doctors said it was hallucination, the mind's last desperate attempt to find meaning in approaching darkness. But Apache's daughter swears her father's eyes were clear when he spoke, lucid and certain and more at peace than she'd ever seen him. The wooden horse still sits in that museum, and sometimes visitors report feeling strange around it. A sense of warmth in a climate-controlled room. A feeling of being watched, but not threateningly. Some report smelling pine trees and snow, impossible scents in a Louisiana summer. Others claim to hear whispered conversations in English and German, voices discussing peace and mercy and the brotherhood of man. The museum staff dismisses these reports as overactive imaginations, as visitors projecting meaning onto a simple carved toy. But sometimes, when the museum is empty and only security guards walk the halls, they report seeing two men standing by the display case. One has dark hair and bronze skin. The other is blond and pale. They stand together looking at the wooden horse, speaking in voices too quiet to make out words, smiling at each other with the understanding of old friends who've shared something profound. When guards approach, the figures vanish. The security footage shows nothing. But the sense of presence remains, a feeling that something sacred happened here, is still happening here, will always be happening here, in this small space, where a wooden horse serves as testament to the truth that even in war's darkest heart, God's light can shine through the cracks in our armor. If you have stayed with this story until now, if it has touched something in your heart, consider this. In our world filled with divisions, with hatreds old and new, with wars both physical and spiritual, we are called to remember what Apache and Stefan remembered, that our enemies are human, that mercy is not weakness, that choosing to see the divine spark in another person, even when the world tells us to kill them, is perhaps the most powerful act of faith we can perform. We are all soldiers in battles we didn't choose. We all carry orders that sometimes contradict our conscience. But we also have the freedom that Apache had in that moment when his finger rested on the trigger. The freedom to choose mercy over murder. The freedom to choose connection over division. The freedom to choose Christ's love over the world's hate. In this moment, wherever you are, whatever wars you're fighting, remember Stefan and Apache. Remember that small wooden horse. Remember that even in the Ardennes forest in December 1944, in the darkest moment of humanity's darkest century, two men found God in each other. And in doing so, they saved not just their lives, but their souls. May you find the courage to choose mercy when the world demands violence. May you see Christ in the face of your enemy. May you carve your own wooden horses, whatever form they take, and give them as offerings of hope in a world that desperately needs to remember we are all children of the same God. May Jesus Christ guide your steps, protect your heart, and remind you always that love is stronger than hate. Mercy is more powerful than vengeance, and faith can survive even in hell's frozen heart. Amen.